Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir.
Our base is
Acknowledged.
under attack.
Yes, affirmative. 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 Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Reporting.
Unit ready.
Waiting
Building.
on acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Comrade, acknowledged.
Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative.
Training.
Yes, sir. Waiting on affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Comrade,
Unit
acknowledged.
ready.
Yes, sir.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged.
Training.
Acknowledged. Yes. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Engineering. Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Yes. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Affirmative. Engineering. Affirmative. Waiting on affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Comrade, affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Engineering. Affirmative. Affirmative. Reporting. Affirmative. Vehicle reporting. Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Acknowledged.
Insufficient funds.
Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Reporting. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Comrade. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Comrade. Acknowledged. Yes, affirmative. Yes, acknowledged. 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 Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Reporting. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Vehicle report. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Waiting for acknowledged. Report acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Vehicle acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Yes, affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Construction options.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged. Engineering. Comrade. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Engineering. Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged.
Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Vehicle affirmative. 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 Yes.
Unit ready.
Acknowledge. Affirmative. Reporting. Affirmative. Vehicle.
Unit lost.
Vehicle reporting.
Our base is under attack. Repair.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit repaired. New construction options.
Reporting. Affirmative. Reporting. Affirmative.
Building.
Waiting on affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Yes, sir.
Construction
Acknowledge.
complete.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledge. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Building.
Vehicle acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Construction complete.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Construction complete.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Building.
Yes, sir.
Construction
Acknowledged.
complete. New construction options.
Comrade. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Comrade. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Waiting orders at once.
Construction complete. New construction options.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Our base is under attack. Structure sold. Building.
Comrade? Yes, sir. Affirmative. At once. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Comrade? Acknowledged.
Construction
Acknowledged.
complete.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir.
Construction complete.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Reporting. Acknowledged. Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Repair.
Affirmative.
Building.
Ready and waiting.
Unit prepared. Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Primary building selected.
Comrade. Affirmative. Vehicle report. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Comrade. Comrade. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Vehicle affirmative. Acknowledged.
Prepare.
Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Comrade. Affirmative.
Unit prepared. Training.
Report
Unit
affirmative.
ready.
Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Vehicle report. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Acknowledged.
Training.
Yes, sir. Very well.
Unit ready. Building. Training.
Engineering. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Yes. Affirmative.
Construction complete.
Engineering. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative.
Vehicle report. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged.
Reporting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Comrade?
Building.
Waiting order.
On hold.
Comrade? Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Waiting order. Waiting order. Acknowledged.
Building.
Comrade? Reporting.
On hold.
Reporting.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Yes, sir.
Awaiting orders.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative.
Construction
Yes, sir.
complete.
Affirmative.
Preparing.
Waiting order. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Unit
Yes, sir.
prepared.
Affirmative. Comrade? Acknowledged.
Building.
Waiting order.
Insufficient funds. Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Yes, sir.
Building.
Awaiting orders. Awaiting orders. Yes, sir. Awaiting orders.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready.
Vehicle reporting.
Yes,
Preparing.
sir.
Vehicle
Unit
reporting.
prepared.
Acknowledged.
Building. Unit ready.
Waiting order.
Affirmative.
Waiting order.
Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Building.
Reporting.
On hold.
Reporting.
Building.
Yes, sir.
Unit ready. Building. Unit ready. Training.
Report affirmative.
Report
Unit
affirmative. Acknowledged.
Engineering affirmative.
Training.
Yes, sir. Report acknowledged.
Vehicle affirmative.
Unit ready.
Engineering affirmative.
Comrade. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Waiting order. Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Awaiting orders.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Awaiting orders.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Comrade.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Reporting. Affirmative.
Waiting order.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Reporting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Waiting order. Reporting.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Building. On hold. Cancel. Building.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders. Acknowledged. Awaiting orders.
Unit ready.
Awaiting orders. Reporting. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged.
Our base is under attack.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Reporting. Yes, sir. At once. Very well. Yes.
Unit lost.
Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Report. Affirmative. Report. Acknowledge.
Building.
Awaiting orders. Affirmative.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledge.
Unit ready.
Vehicle report.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Building.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged.
Building.
Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Awaiting orders.
Acknowledged.
Await. Acknowledge. Awaiting orders.
Affirmative.
Reporting.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Acknowledge.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, acknowledge.
Waiting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Building.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Engineering.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, affirmative. Engineering.
Unit
Yes,
lost.
sir. Acknowledged.
New construction
Yes, sir.
options. Unit lost.
Affirmative. Waiting order.
Building.
Vehicle reporting. Waiting
Affirmative.
order.
Affirmative.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Construction complete. Building. Construction complete.
Awaiting orders.
Training. Primary building
Yes,
selected.
affirmative.
Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledge. Vehicle acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged.
Yes, affirmative.
Training.
Reporting. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Yes, affirmative. Vehicle reporting. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative.
Repairing. Unit repaired. Repairing.
Waiting on. Acknowledged.
Yes, affirmative.
Acknowledged.
Unit
Acknowledged.
repaired.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Repairing. Unit repaired.
Affirmative.
Building.
Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Waiting order.
Yes, sir.
Vehicle reporting.
Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Reporting.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Construction complete.
Acknowledged.
Building. Unit
Report
ready.
lead. Acknowledged.
Very well.
Acknowledged.
Very well.
Building.
Yes, sir. Report acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Comrade.
Insufficient
Yes, sir.
funds.
Yes, sir.
Unit ready.
Waiting order, comrade. Affirmative.
Report affirmative. Yes, sir.
Repair.
Vehicle reporting.
Naval unit
Acknowledge.
lost.
Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Unit repaired.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Acknowledge.
Repaired. Naval
Acknowledged.
unit lost.
Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Acknowledge.
Unit repaired.
Awaiting orders.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Comrade. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledge. Affirmative. Acknowledge. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative.
Naval unit lost. Building.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit ready. Unit ready.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Building. Unit ready. Building.
Vehicle acknowledged. Report acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Prepared.
Comrade.
Unit
Affirmative.
ready.
Affirmative. Reporting.
Building.
Awaiting orders.
Unit ready.
Waiting
Unit
order.
prepared.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledge. Affirmative.
Building.
Acknowledge.
Our base is under attack.
Affirmative. Comrade.
Unit ready.
Reporting. Very well. Affirmative. Reporting. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Building.
Affirmative. Vehicle reporting.
Unit ready. Building.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Unit ready. Building.
Affirmative. Vehicle report. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Report. Affirmative.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Building.
Reporting. Yes, sir.
Unit
Acknowledged.
ready.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Acknowledged.
Building. Unit ready. Building.
Awaiting orders. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Insufficient funds. Unit ready.
Vehicle reporting. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged. Vehicle acknowledged. Acknowledged. Waiting order. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Waiting order.
Affirmative. Affirmative.
Reporting.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Comrade.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Affirmative.
Building. Our base is under attack.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Waiting order.
Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. 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 Reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Reporting. Awaiting orders.
Acknowledged.
Reporting. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Vehicle report. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Prepare.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Reporting.
Comrade. Affirmative. Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Affirmative.
Await. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit prepared.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Building.
Reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative.
Report. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit ready.
Vehicle.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative.
Building.
Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Unit ready. Building.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Unit ready.
Acknowledged. Reporting.
Acknowledged.
Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Reporting. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Comrade.
Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Yes, sir.
Waiting order. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Affirmative. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Report affirmative. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Waiting order.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Acknowledged.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Affirmative. 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 Affirmative.
Reporting. Acknowledged.
Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative.
Comrade.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Vehicle reporting.
Affirmative. Comrade.
Affirmative. 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 Vehicle reporting. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Acknowledge. Acknowledge. Affirmative.
Awaiting orders.
Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Yes.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Reporting.
Affirmative. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Acknowledged. Affirmative. 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 Acknowledged. 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 Affirmative. Acknowledged. Reporting.
Affirmative. Waiting order.
Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged. Affirmative. Acknowledged.
Unit
very well.
lost.
Very well. Yes, sir.
Affirmative.
Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Unit lost.
Acknowledged. Reporting.
Unit lost.
Very well.
Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Report.
Very well. Affirmative. Affirmative. Yes, sir.
Affirmative. Acknowledge. Yes, sir.
Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Affirmative.
Waiting orders.
Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Acknowledged. Yes, sir. Affirmative.
Yes, sir. Affirmative. Reporting.
Building.
Ready and waiting.
Acknowledged.
Reporting.
Acknowledged.
Awaiting orders. At once.
Unit ready. Building.
Reporting. Acknowledged.
Unit ready. Mission accomplished.